Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Benefit or Blunder, Fast Tracking ERP Selection. Our goal today is to provide you with beneficial insights that will help you get the most out of your enterprise technology investments. I'd like to take a brief moment to let you know that Ultra Consultants is serving as your host today and to tell you a little bit more about who we are. As independent ERP consultants, our team is part of our client's organization, working shoulder to shoulder with ERP project teams throughout the country. Being a vendor independent consulting firm means two main things. First, we are your partner for guiding you in your vendor education and selection, and that's where we help you get to know in depth the enterprise software vendors and implementation practices that are best for your company and your unique project needs. Second, we are also your partner for helping you discover how to make improvements throughout your organization using your chosen technologies. Please feel free to reach out to me if you'd like to learn more about Ultra, or you can visit us at ultraconsultants.com. It's my pleasure to introduce today's experts. From Ultra, we have business consultant Shannon Harrop. Shannon offers exceptional project leadership, lean manufacturing, and supply chain improvement expertise. With experience in a variety of manufacturing industries, she specializes in using her broad technical abilities to successfully manage large, complex projects from ideation to completion. I'd also like to welcome our special guest expert, Maureen Hunt, Engagement Manager with QAD. For more than 20 years, Maureen has been involved in ERP implementations with customers in life sciences, consumer products, automotive, high-tech, industrial, and food and beverage industries. In her role as an engagement manager, Maureen works to ensure complete understanding of the implementation scope, the customer requirements, and works closely with ERP project teams from conception through project actualization. Thank you both very much for joining us today. And now I will hand it over to Maureen to give us a brief introduction to QAD.
Thank you, Kristen. So QAD, we are an ERP vendor. We specialize primarily in manufacturing. We have offices within 19 countries around the world, 7,000 customer sites, and 2,000 implementations going today. We are leaders in cloud ERP. We enable our customers to become adaptive manufacturing enterprises.
Thank you, Maureen. Let's go ahead and deep dive and start talking about the benefits or blunders or general tips on things that may affect your ability to fast track an ERP selection. So let's first talk about maybe some prerequisites, right? What are some best practices that can actually enable a timely project? These are the three that we came up with that we typically see most often. And the one that sticks out to me the most that I'm probably most passionate about is really number 3, high-level functional areas that are in scope. You really want to make sure before you start your selection project that you really scope out not only the right people, but also making sure that the right functions are involved, as well as the right locations, right? So if you're looking at selecting an ERP product that's going to be implemented across multiple locations, you want to consider which locations and which functions are going to be in that phase 1, which locations and functions are going to be impacted the most, right? And get those people involved from day 1 on that project to help define all of their requirements. So number 3 to me is really up there on the list of most important prereqs. Maureen, any comments on anything on this list as well?
One of the things that I see quite frequently is executive buy-in. So by getting the executive buy-in up front, you've identified the business case. You've also defined some outcomes that you want to see as a result of the implementation of an ERP system. What that does is that allows executives to really look at key deliverables and be able to measure the success of the ERP project. So by getting that all up front, it typically helps the company to fast track this ERP selection process. It also allows us with the cost expectations and alignment of budget.
Yeah, kind of number 1 and 2 kind of impact each other, right? Yep. So all of these 3 prerequisites, if we can start working on those ahead of time and really spend time leading into those, then we're thinking that we can definitely fast track some of our selection activities. Now, some other strategies that we can think about that impact our project timeline are listed here. And we kind of want to talk through, are these benefits, are some of them blunders, and kind of the benefits and negatives to each of these. So the first one that we definitely wanted to talk about is, can we skip the long list and move straight to a short list at the beginning of our selection? I would say, at least from Ultra's standpoint, we would do this a majority of the times when we're engaging with our clients. It is extremely beneficial to have us as a third party perspective to take the hundreds of potential solutions that are out in the market today and narrow down the ones that would be relevant to your industry and to your vertical. So Ultra has that capability to be able to help you with that. I would recommend that if internally, if you do not have the capability to do that, partnering with Ultra would definitely help. Otherwise, it may be difficult for you, for just your team, to be able to narrow that down. But if you can do that, if you choose to partner with Ultra, that can really reduce time up front trying to select that product and moving straight to that short list. Any comments from the QAD's perspective on that, Maureen?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, QAD, as I mentioned, we focus primarily in manufacturing industries,
Yep.
right? So we are ERP only for manufacturers. We don't consider other industries. So what happens then is by shortlisting, Ultra is working with a QA with a manufacturing customer. Obviously, we would want QAD to be part of that scope, right? So if we're looking outside of that industry, then typically bringing QAD to the table isn't going to make sense either from the customer's perspective or from QAD's perspective to engage. So really what happens is we're spending time and cost on something that's really not going to be a great fit. Ultra can bring that expertise and bring QAD to the table in the right circumstances.
Yeah, that's very true. And the industry, the vertical is one of many variables that we would look at, right? There's a lot of variables that you can look at initially to narrow down to a best fit. So that absolutely makes sense, focusing on that manufacturing space. QAD would definitely be one of those players. So benefit or blunder, right? Seems like if it's done properly, I would definitely consider that a benefit. Would you agree, Maureen?
Yes, absolutely. Agree with that across the board.
So let's talk about number 2 then. Leveraging standard requirements in a list. Do you think that there's some potential benefit to that, Maureen?
Well, there absolutely is, because regardless of your industry, right, certain things around the financials, specifically accounts payable, accounts receivable, the process is going to be similar across the board. So really what we want to do is we want to streamline what are the key functions in those areas that we need, right? So QED comes to the table, we bring our best practices forward, and we can actually tick the box right across those functional areas. There are specific areas that are going to be unique to every business and every selection, right? So things such as supply chain and manufacturing production. That's really where you want to really focus on what your unique business requirements are.
I would echo everything that you said. There are typically, when we work with customers and start developing their requirements, we always see trends where the unique requirements lie more in the supply chain and manufacturing spaces, whereas the standard, there's SOX compliance, there's financial GAAP compliances, right? So a lot of those typical API processes are already meeting kind of those standard requirements lists, whereas there's some other areas that require you to deep dive a little bit further and really get that level of understanding, such as the supply chain and manufacturing spaces. So sounds like this is maybe another one where you can definitely leverage standard requirements, and we don't have to, make a list of 1,000 requirements in all functions if that's done correctly. But you may want to, deep dive and have some unique requirements in certain areas, right?
Right. And just from an implementation perspective, the uniqueness is where it's going to come.
Yep.
That's really where you're going to want to focus on the implementation side as well.
Yeah. It's going to come out at some point, right? And if you can identify that ahead of time, especially, and leverage those uniquenesses through the selection, I think it would only help the selection process, right? All right, last one, number 3, cross-functional teams being included in the selection process. So what do you think would be maybe a benefit of keeping a leaner team? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I really do. I think that if you're bringing the right people to the selection, then you're really focusing on those key performance indicators that you want to get out of the project. You're also making sure that you're focused on the business requirements, right? So you're not just seeing something unique and pretty that's going to drive a selection when you're not really focused on what the business requirements there are.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. I think there's a sweet spot where having too many cooks in the kitchen can be a little bit painful, because everyone has almost their own requirements in their heads that they're selecting against, right? And maybe they don't align. The more people, the harder it is to align those with the business's goals, right?
Right. They might focus on their personal requirements and not necessarily the business requirement.
Yeah. That's very true. I would say where you want to have that balance though is making sure that those areas that are those unique areas that we talked about last time, right? Those unique areas should definitely be included. And then any areas where we feel like are going to gain the most value out of the new ERP, right? We want them to be included because we really want to understand the upstream impacts and the downstream impacts. So that's where the cross functionality during selection really matters, so that we're really seeing in the systems how certain functionality affects upstream and downstream functions, right? We don't want it to be either solely an IT based selection. We don't want it to be solely a financial team making the decisions in the selection, right? There are a lot of, it's an enterprise solution, right? There's a lot of impact upstream and downstream. So making sure we get the right people from day one is very important. Maybe it's another one that, depending on how well it's done, could be a benefit or a blunder. So
Yeah. And I think you want to make sure that you're not eliminating any particular business area when you're selecting that team as well.
Yeah, true.
Make sure everybody has some sort of representation when you bring that team to the table.
Agreed. We talked a little bit about things that may benefit you, things that may cause some delays, but we wanted to bring a couple other things to the table that we've seen cause delays in the past, just to make sure that you get on these ahead of time, right? So common areas that we've seen that would slow down a selection, number one, it's going to happen across the board, is just making sure that we've got control of our master data. And what we mean by that is to avoid delays during the selection process, you really want to make sure up front you understand your risks in your master data, you understand the quality of the data and the consistency, right? If you know that ahead of time, once you partner with your vendor, it's going to really speed up the process to get your first data set in the system, the first migrations going very smoothly. It's really just going to drastically increase the ramp up into your implementation if you can get ahead of those master data cleansing activities and any of that cleanup that's required. Would you agree, Maureen, on any of that?
I mean, absolutely. As soon as you start thinking about doing an ERP project, master data should be at the top of your mind. It's something that, we can start doing ahead of a project, a selection, regardless of who that vendor is going to be. It's something that we really need to take into account, because at the time that we would do an implementation, right, the quality of the output of any ERP system is only going to be as good as that data that we're putting into the system. So by cleansing that and taking that as a priority as part of your upfront planning, it's going to really streamline the entire project and drive success for your organization.
I totally agree.
One of the things we see quite frequently, specifically as a vendor, is a request for customer references and getting those scheduled, right? So one of the things that we can take into account, again, upfront as we're planning, as we're looking into who makes the long list or the short list. Obviously, we want to short list it, as we talked about, in a prior slide. But really what that does is that allows the vendor a little bit of leeway to find the right references, right? So you want to make sure that that customer is aligned in business as well as size, right? So if you're a $50 million manufacturing company, what a $5 billion manufacturing company is going to do is going to be quite different. So when we're aligning those customer references, one thing we as a vendor have to make sure of is that we're respecting that customer, we're respecting their privacy, and that we're giving them the right amount of information and lead time to make sure that they can speak effectively and provide those references as expected, right? So if you start thinking and asking earlier in the sales cycle to provide those references, it really does help the vendors to be able to expedite that. So as your list gets shorter and as you're getting into reference calls, we're really finding that, that lead time enables us to more quickly respond to that request and to align those reference calls to expedite your particular selection, as opposed to waiting on the back end.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to say for customer references to be beneficial and to really be leveraged. There needs to be the transparency up front and the specific match, the right match, right? So we don't want to be pairing a smaller size $50 million organization up with $1 billion organization when we're talking about a customer reference. There's just going to be too many differences. So we really want to just make sure that we are clarifying those ahead of time, right? What kind of customers would you be interested in talking to? If you want to talk about same size, that's one thing. If you also want to talk to customers that have similar products, that can narrow it down even further, right? So that list of customers can really quickly become very small. So it's easier if we know that ahead of time. That way we can really work to schedule those, right?
Right. And it typically helps us on the vendor side as well when we're looking across, 7,000 different customers that want to, who is the right niche customer to participate in those reference calls.
Yeah.
And then it helps us start targeting the right references ahead of time, being able to bring those to the table sooner rather than later.
Yeah.
And we also want to make sure that, their experience is going to match the experience that you're going to get, right? Because experience, team size, all of that on the implementation side is going to vary depending upon your individual company and how we're addressing those projects.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think one of the other things here is really making sure that we're laser focused on those business outcomes that we talked about previously and what the key performance indicators, those business drivers are going to be as we move forward. Because one of the things that I've seen quite frequently slow down a sales selection is really scope creep or not understanding the change management that your organization is going to go through, misaligned expectations, right? So what's happening is if we lose sight of those outcomes that are the business case and the drivers, the executive buy-in that we got to go forward with the selection, really what we're doing is, we're slowing down the process and we're going down paths of things that could be implemented later on. It could be a feature that a software has today, but we don't need to take that into account up front. And when we start to do that on any project in any sales cycle, we try to align with the customer that by doing that, here's delays to the benefit you're going to get out of the overall ERP selection as well.
Yeah, I would say this last one, number 3, definitely the most common reason for any kind of delay during the implementation of the product. Absolutely, right? All of the initial planning and work that you would put in up front to actually roadmap out different phases of the implementation, whether it's locations being phased in or functionality being phased in, right? Anything like that is really important because it helps you understand not only expectations, right? Change management side of it, where the business understands when that I'm going to get that functionality, right? When is my job going to change? Is it going to change on day one, right? And so for some functions, maybe yes, but for a lot of areas, that there may be some phased in functionality that it's better for them to understand that ahead of time. That way they're not going through the implementation expecting one thing and then seeing something else being delivered, right?
Right. Well, and it's going to always change the project timeline, the deliverables that the executives are expecting, and also the project cost. Right. So then we have misaligned expectations that can cause frustration, both on the customer, the vendor, and the consulting side, someone like Ultra.
Agreed. Yep. This last one's a big one. So I think we definitely ended on the high note there. And at this point, I'll pass it back to Kristen and hopefully we can engage a little bit. I know this is definitely more of a discussion based and we're looking to see as we've talked, if anyone came up with any good questions.
Thanks, Shannon, and thanks to both of you. We'll be moving on to Q&A in just a moment. As promised, I'd like to share some additional resources available to our audience before we move on. First, we have Ultra's latest ebook, 7 Essential Strategies for a Successful ERP Project. Experts from the Ultra team share insight gained in projects for manufacturers and distributors, including proving best practices and advice on methodology priorities, project team, and change management. And then from our friends at Q80, we have Why Does ERP Fail? A leadership white paper for the global manufacturing industry that offers insight into ERP project failure and the benefits of a business-focused approach. We'll go ahead and move on to Q&A. Our first question is about the shortlist, and that is how many vendors should be included in that shortlist? Shannon, this one's over to you.
Yeah. Yep. So, because this is typically before someone like Maureen would get engaged, right? So I was going to go ahead and grab this question, but At Ultra, we've got a center of excellence, and we have built not only relationships with all of the software vendors that are players today, but we also have a deep knowledge and understanding of what their key verticals are, what their features and functions that they're most beneficial for that software, and maybe what they might be lacking in, right? So we understand not only what their functionality is, but also their roadmap. So is a software currently investing in their time and energy into improving any of those features and functions, right? Where they're investing their time. So we have a deep understanding of all of these softwares. Based on looking at that list and our understandings of each of them, what we're able to do is compile a list of less than 10. So we really want to keep the long list to less than 10. And what we would do is engage in quick discussions with those 10. We typically have to see a sweet spot of about 7, and we would have about a 2-hour, what we call a vendor qualification with those 7. So what we would do is take those 7 vendors, ask them questions through email, right? Ask them to submit written responses through email, and have a 2-hour session with them where we would do a quick demonstration based on our uniqueness, right? So as a company, figure out what those like secret sauces we talked about earlier. We want to engage that long list and see if they can meet our requirements for that secret sauce, right, of our business, what makes us unique. Once we do that with the 7 of those 2-hour calls and short demos, then we would like to get down to about 2 or 3 for a short list typically. And that's where we would then go and engage in much longer detailed demonstrations.
All right, thanks for that, Shannon. Maureen, I think this one is probably better for you. In my experience, the biggest delays are with software vendor requiring more time in the RFP responses, even when the RFP timeline is indicated in that, including demo prep, additional demos, and deep dives. How do you ensure that these delays don't happen?
Well, I think some of that comes down to the quality of the RFP that we receive, right? So sometimes we receive an RFP, sometimes we receive it on Tuesday with the expectation that it's going to be resolved on Friday, right? So it's going to be submitted. Particularly at QED, we don't have a centralized RFP response team, right? So your individual account team, we're responsible for taking on that RFP response, answering that thoroughly, and understanding how we're going to go forward. So that could be part of the reason is sometimes it's an unrealistic timeline that we're given. As far as from a demo and a demo prep perspective, what we see is a lot of times customers or prospective customers will come to us with the nice to haves, and they have demo scripts out there for things that are nice to have. It's your wish list, right? So where we focus in a demo, sometimes we end up going down some of those delays that we've talked about, right? So we're not focused on the key outcomes and the scope, and we're having scope creep even just as a result of demonstrations going down the wrong path and including everything that's a nice to have or a wish list item. So if we can really get a focused RFP with the script and what's required to meet that executive buy-in, ensure the outcomes, right? Then the other nice to haves could be things that we could follow up with after the initial demo and after qualification. I hope that answered the question.
Great. Yes, it did. And Shannon, do you have anything to add from the Ultra perspective?
Yeah, I think that question is very much aligned with one of the topics that we talked about earlier, which is having clearly defined business objectives and clearly defined requirements from the get-go, right? If we understand what the business is trying to get out of this project, and that is included in the RFP, and then also if there's clearly defined requirements mostly focus on your uniqueness, that can also really help vendors align more quickly and get more quickly prepared to show you their software and to demonstrate and really respond back to you. If we're kind of narrowing that scope to the uniqueness up front, you do have a lot of requirements that can quickly become, like Maureen said, a mixture of nice to haves and must haves. So as much as you can call out the must haves, make it very clear this is a must have, right? And put that on there. At Ultra, we actually show flowcharts of the future state. This is what our future state looks like, right? So not only what your current requirements are to recreate what you're doing today, but also thinking about what your future state looks like, right? So making sure that those are called out. That way, Maureen at QAD can see, okay, they're doing this today, right? But their future state, they want to be able to do these things. So that's probably what they're looking for, right? So to be able to say what's a must have, what's a nice to have, and maybe what is our future state, right? What is going to be the functions that really are going to help us grow as a business? And that really is just going to help them narrow down and be able to present more meaningful content.
Yeah, it helps us be more effective with any demonstration or response as well.
Yep.
All right, great. And that's going to be all we have time for today. From all of us here at Ultra, thank you to everyone for joining us. We'd like to wish you a great rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next webinar.